A Malibu mansion drowns in the cries of newborns. 9 months without silence. Their mother died giving them life. No doctor, no nurse. No amount of money has helped them sleep. Grief haunts every hallway. And then, one night, silence returns. The Cardone estate hadn't known a moment of stillness since Elena's final breath. 9 months ago, she died bringing her sons into the world, Jake, John, and Jaden. And since then, the nights had become a kind of sacred torment, crying that refused to cease. Hired help that never lasted. No rest. No peace. Only endless echoing screams through the grand marble halls of the Malibu mansion. Peter Cardone, one of the wealthiest men in the state, had built empires, crushed markets, and won every battle life threw at him, until this one. No amount of power could teach him how to be a father to 3 motherless boys. No amount of money could bring sleep to his home. Experts came. Nurses rotated like a revolving door. Every method failed. At 3:07 a.m., Peter walked the hallway with eyes hollowed by exhaustion. He expected more of the same, crying chaos, maybe another resignation note. But as he opened the nursery door, something stopped him cold. Stillness. And in that stillness, a scene that nearly brought him to his knees. Grace Davis, the quiet new maid he'd barely registered, lay asleep on the oversized bed, one arm tucked beneath her head, the other gently resting across 3 tiny bodies. The triplets were wrapped around her, their breaths slow and deep, their faces serene. Not one of them stirred. A soft, golden light from the corner lamp painted the room in something close to holy, as if the universe itself had leaned in to witness this fragile, sacred peace. For the first time in 9 months, the mansion was quiet. Not just quiet healed. Peter didn't speak. He didn't move. He only watched, stunned, from the sofa across the room, as if afraid a single word would break the spell. This miracle was the beginning of everything. Before we dive into this emotional story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's continue the story. Peter didn't breathe as the sun crept over the hills of Malibu. The triplets were still asleep, their tiny bodies nestled against Grace like they'd finally come home. He whispered to the night nurse, "Who is she?" The nurse looked just as stunned. Grace Davis, new cleaning staff. She started 3 days ago. Quiet girl. Peter stared at her. A maid. Just a maid. Not a specialist, not a therapist. He'd paid tens of thousands for the best minds in the country. And this girl, with worn sneakers and sleep in her eyes, had done what none of them could. Grace stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding her face before panic hit. She sat up fast, careful not to jolt the babies. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean to fall asleep in here. I was just folding blankets, and they were crying, and then—" "You put them to sleep," Peter said, voice flat but filled with something he didn't recognize, hope or fear. Maybe both. Grace stood, head lowered. "I'll get my things. I didn't mean to break any rules." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he watched as she gently laid the boys back into their cribs, kissed each forehead like she'd known them forever, and left the room without another word. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Grace kept her head down, scrubbing baseboards in the east wing like nothing had happened. Peter watched her through the security feed. She never looked up, never spoke out of turn. But that night, the boys screamed again the moment she wasn't there. Peter rubbed his eyes, heart thudding in his chest. Coincidence, or something else. That night, Grace stood in the laundry room folding towels with tired hands. The hum of the machine was the only sound. She whispered to herself, like a prayer, "God, I don't know why you brought me here, But if these babies need me, I'll stay. Just please, don't let me mess this up. Her mind drifted back to South Central, raised in a 2-bedroom apartment by her Nana, who prayed over every scraped knee and every overdue bill. Grace had helped raise 5 cousins by the age of 16. Crying babies weren't new. Loving them into peace wasn't either. But this wasn't her world. Not really. Not billionaires and gated estates. Still, something about those triplets tugged at a part of her she'd long hidden. Upstairs, Peter stared at the monitor as Jake, John, and Jaden screamed themselves hoarse. Then he opened the door and whispered down the hallway, "Grace." She turned slowly, towel in hand. He didn't say the words. He didn't have to. A silent question passed between them, and she nodded. She stepped into the nursery, and for the second night in a row, silence followed her. Peter watched frozen, his heart cracking open in ways that scared him. "Lord, what are you doing?" He didn't realize he'd whispered the question aloud, until Grace turned her head, just slightly, and whispered back. Maybe something new. A fever, a lullaby, a secret gift. The scream ripped through the baby monitor like a blade. Peter dropped his phone and ran. "Jake!" he called out, heart hammering. He nearly collided with 2 nurses as they rushed from the nursery, frantic. "Sir, it's fever." One of them stammered. "It's spiking. 104.7 and rising. We tried Tylenol, cool cloths. Nothing's working." "Where's Dr. Carter?" Peter asked, voice rising. "Unreachable," the nurse whispered, guilt in her eyes. "We've left 4 messages." Peter stormed into the nursery. Jake's skin was flushed, damp with sweat, and his cries came in short, painful bursts. His tiny chest rose and fell like he was trying to fight the fire from the inside. "God, not again. Please, not again." And then Grace appeared, barefoot, calm, hands trembling, but eyes steady. "Sir," she said quietly, "please, let me try." Peter hesitated. Everything in him wanted to scream no, to push her out. She was just a maid, just a girl from nowhere. But Jake screamed again, and Peter stepped back. Grace knelt beside the crib, whispering words Peter didn't recognize. Then she lifted Jake gently into her arms, cradling him against her heart. She began to sing, a soft, broken melody, the kind only grandmothers carry through generations, the kind that sound like home. "Jesus loves me, this I know." Her voice shook on the first few lines, but something sacred wrapped around the room like a balm. Jake whimpered, then sighed. His body relaxed. The redness in his cheeks began to fade. The thermometer in the nurse's hand beeped again. 102.1, she whispered, eyes wide. Grace kept singing. "Little ones to him belong." John stopped crying. Jaden rolled over, thumb in his mouth, breathing steady. And Peter couldn't move. He just stood there, watching her rock his son with the kind of love no paycheck could buy. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't luck. It was healing. It was holy. He felt his throat tighten. When the last note of the lullaby faded into silence, Grace opened her eyes slowly. Jake was asleep. The room felt like church. Peter stepped forward. "Thank you," he said, softer than he meant. She looked up, startled. It was the first time he'd said those words to her. Maybe the first time anyone had in a long time. She smiled barely. "It's what I was made for." Down the hall, the head housekeeper, Mrs. Lorraine, watched from the shadows. Her eyes narrowed. She whispered to a junior maid beside her, "She's not here to clean. She's here for something else." Later that night, Peter passed the nursery again. The lights were low. The triplets slept in perfect peace. But he paused, because through the crack of the door, he saw Grace kneeling, head bowed, whispering prayers over each child like a mother anointing her own. Peter closed his eyes, chest tight. Lord, what are you trying to teach me? And somewhere deep in his soul, something began to answer. The housekeeper's warning. Grace barely made it out of the nursery before she heard the heels. Click, click, click. She turned. Mrs. Lorraine stood at the end of the hallway, arms folded tight, lips drawn into a polite dagger of a smile. Grace, she said. A word. Grace wiped her hands on her apron. Yes, ma'am. The older woman stepped closer, eyes scanning her like a bug beneath glass. You've had quite a moment, Lorraine said coolly. The entire staff's talking. So is Mr. Cardone. Grace kept her eyes down. I didn't mean to cause anything. Lorraine's voice dropped, sweet and sharp. Let me be clear. You were hired to clean baseboards, windows, toilets, not hearts. Grace flinched, but nodded. Yes, ma'am. Men like him, Lorraine said, her smile growing thin. Don't notice girls like you. Whatever kindness he's shown, don't confuse it for something it's not. You are an employee, a disposable one. Grace swallowed. Something burned behind her eyes, but she held her ground. I understand. Lorraine leaned in, breath like lavender and venom. Don't forget your place. Grace returned to the laundry room, her hands folding towels, but her mind was a storm. You knew this wouldn't last. You're the help. That's all you'll ever be here. But even as her fear rose, something stronger fought it back. A voice, small and steady, like her grandmother's used to say. God didn't bring you this far to drop you in fear. Stand still and let him fight for you. By lunchtime, the triplets had made their opinions clear. Jake crawled straight past the nurse and toward Grace's feet, tugging at her pants leg. John and Jaden whined until they heard her voice, then dropped their heads against her chest with satisfied sighs. Peter watched from across the room, brows raised. This is becoming a pattern, he said, half smiling. Grace flushed. I am sorry. I've tried to stay out of the way. You're not in the way, he said, more serious now. They look for you when you're gone. They need you. Grace didn't know what to say, but her heart was pounding in her ears, and Mrs. Lorraine, watching from the kitchen entry, clutched her clipboard a little too tight. Later that evening, Peter reviewed camera footage, triplets crawling toward Grace, her calming voice lulling them like waves on shore. He rewound it again and again, then paused. He opened a file on his computer, an email from Lorraine 2 weeks ago. The new maid is quiet, average, unlikely to stay long. His jaw tensed. She's anything but average, he muttered. Back in the nursery, Grace rocked the boys with a soft hum, her hands gentle, her mind guarded. Don't get too close. Don't believe this is real. You've been invisible before. You'll be invisible again. Still, when Jake smiled up at her, her heart cracked. And when Peter peeked in to say goodnight, and their eyes met for a breath too long, she knew staying detached wasn't going to work. What she didn't know was that someone was watching through the cracked office door and plotting. The night Peter finally sees her, the mansion felt quieter lately, not just because the triplets were finally sleeping, but because something in the atmosphere had shifted, as if peace had begun to find its way into the corners of the Cardone estate, settling into the spaces where grief had once lived. Grace had become a fixture in the nursery. The boys refused to rest without her sent nearby, her lullabies humming softly through the baby monitor. Day after day, night after night, she showed up with the same quiet strength, rocking, feeding, singing. Peter noticed. At first, he told himself it was about the boys. That's why he lingered longer in the doorway, why he stayed when she read them bedtime stories or sang those hymns that somehow made the whole house breathe deeper. But one night, after another feeding, he didn't leave. Grace looked up, surprised. You're still here." He gave a sheepish shrug. "They sleep better with you around." Her eyes softened. They just needed love. That's all. He sat down on the sofa, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't think I even know how to give that, not the way they need it." Grace didn't respond right away. She looked at Jake, snuggled against her shoulder, then whispered, "You're trying. That counts for more than you think." Peter exhaled. "My wife, Elena, she made everything seem easy, even impossible. Without her, I barely recognize who I am anymore." Grace nodded. "Grief does that. It strips us down, shows us what's left." He turned toward her. "And what was left of you?" She hesitated, then answered, "Just faith, and a lot of unanswered prayers." Peter leaned back, watching her, not as a maid, not as an employee, but as a woman who had lived pain and somehow let it make her gentler, not harder. "What did you dream of before all this?" He asked quietly. Grace looked down. "I wanted to open a home daycare back in South Central, a safe space for kids who had no one. I used to draw it in notebooks when I was little. Crayon walls, plastic toys, loud laughter." "And what happened?" "Life," she said with a sad smile. "Bills. Loss. I buried the dream to keep other people alive." Peter stared at her, really saw her, her bravery, her brokenness, her grace. She stood to place Jake back in his crib. He stirred, whimpered, until her fingertips brushed his cheek, and then silence. Peter stepped forward with a bottle for Jaden. Their hands met, just for a second. Warmth shot through his chest. Their eyes locked. She pulled away quickly, a flush creeping up her neck. I should finish the laundry." Peter nodded, voice stuck in his throat. "Yeah, of course." She slipped out, closing the door behind her. But the air stayed charged, thick with something unspoken. In the hallway, Grace paused, hand pressed to her heart. Inside the nursery, Peter stood alone, wondering when a maid had started haunting his thoughts. The sabotage. Mrs. Lorraine watched from the corner of the staircase, lips pursed so tight they nearly disappeared. She had spent 20 years running this house, answering directly to Elena Cardone herself. She had known how to keep things orderly, how to stay essential. But ever since that girl arrived, the rhythm of the house had changed. And Peter Cardone had changed with it. The way he watched Grace, the way he smiled without realizing, the softness in his voice when he asked, "Where's Grace?" Lorraine could feel the floor slipping out from beneath her, so she did what came naturally. She set the trap. Grace was in the sitting room, folding baby blankets when Lorraine entered with her usual clipped smile. "Could you straighten that corner cabinet when you're finished?" she said, pointing to a tall glass display case. "Elena's keepsakes are dusty. Be careful." Grace nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Lorraine left, and returned 5 minutes later with Peter in tow. As they entered, a soft crash echoed from the cabinet. Peter's face went pale. On the floor lay a shattered porcelain figurine, a ballerina in pale blue, one of Elena's favorites, a gift from her mother. Grace stood frozen, wide-eyed. I didn't touch it. I was just dusting the outside. I swear it just tipped over." Lorraine gasped theatrically. "Oh no, that was one of Mrs. Cardone's most precious heirlooms." She looked at Peter, voice dripping with disappointment. "It's a shame. Carelessness can't be undone." Grace's lip trembled. "I didn't. Please believe me. I would never disrespect her memory." Peter stared at the shattered glass, then at Grace, and for a heartbeat, he said nothing. Grace's heart dropped. That silence crushed more than any insult ever could. Then Peter exhaled and turned. "No," he said firmly. "This isn't her fault." Lorraine blinked. Excuse me. He knelt, inspecting the shelf. The stand is uneven. Someone moved it too close to the edge. This wasn't carelessness, it was a setup. Lorraine's face flushed. Are you suggesting? I'm saying, Peter interrupted, rising slowly. I know who Grace is, and I know what she isn't. His voice was steel. She saved my sons. She's held this family together when I couldn't. She's shown more integrity in a few weeks than most show in a lifetime. Lorraine took a step back. Sir, I was only... You can go, Peter said quietly. I need time to think. Grace was shaking, tears in her eyes. I would have understood if you believed her. Peter looked at her gently, but I didn't. She opened her mouth to respond, but didn't. Instead, she nodded, eyes lowered, and slowly turned to pick up the broken porcelain. No, Peter said. Leave it. Some things are better left behind. Lorraine stood just beyond the hallway, trembling, not in guilt, but rage. She would not be replaced. Not by a girl who sang lullabies and stirred hearts. The secret that almost broke everything. Rumors move fast in big houses, faster when whispered by trusted lips. Mrs. Lorraine made sure of that. It began in the kitchen. Did you hear about Grace's old jobs? She said sweetly, pouring coffee for the staff. Fired twice. Some say it was money missing. Others, well, they say she got too close to the man of the house. By lunchtime, it had reached the gardeners. By evening, the security team was trading versions over the monitors. She targets wealthy men, Lorraine said with a smug tilt of her head. Always around their kids. Makes herself indispensable. It's all part of the act. And then Grace heard it. She had come to the pantry for extra formula when she froze behind the wall. And now Peter? Lorraine continued. Hook, line, and sinker. It's pathetic, really. The girl knows exactly what she's doing. Grace's breath left her body like she'd been punched. She didn't confront them. She just turned and walked blindly through the hall, past the nursery, past the gleaming staircases, out to the garden, where no one could hear her sob. Peter found her there 20 minutes later. She sat on a bench in the dark, knees pulled to her chest, hands trembling. He approached quietly. Grace. She didn't look at him. It's true. Parts of it, anyway. Peter sat beside her. Talk to me. She exhaled shakily. I left my last job because the head of the house wouldn't leave me alone. When I reported it, they let me go. Said I made it up to get attention. Her voice cracked. The job before that? I quit because I couldn't handle the hours. I was helping raise my nieces while working nights. No one cared about the why, only that I left. Peter said nothing, just listened. I've been poor my whole life, she whispered. Not the kind of poor you recover from, but the kind that follows you into every room, every judgment, every closed door. She wiped her face. I never wanted anything from you. Not your money, not your attention. Just to be useful, to matter, to belong somewhere. Peter's throat burned. Grace, he said quietly, you don't belong somewhere. You belong here, with them, with me. She finally looked up, her eyes shining with disbelief. He nodded. I see you. I believe you, and I will protect you. A breeze moved through the trees, gentle, like God exhaling peace back into her soul. Grace closed her eyes. I prayed someone would see me. Just once. Peter leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low. Maybe he finally sent someone who could. In the shadows of the kitchen window, Lorraine watched them, her jaw clenched, her eyes cold. If this was war, she was far from done. Love in the quiet moments. Grace wasn't on the cleaning schedule anymore. Peter made it official that morning, in front of the entire staff. Effective immediately, Grace will be overseeing the children's daily care. She has full access to the nursery, the kitchen, and my full support." The staff murmured. Lorraine bit her tongue, so hard she tasted blood. But Grace stood stunned, blinking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure?" Peter looked her in the eye. "I've never been more sure of anything." The days that followed felt like spring finally reaching the house. The triplets laughed, real belly laughs that echoed through the marble halls. They napped with their little arms tangled around Grace's sleeves. Even the walls seemed softer now. Peter joined her more often, learning how to hold bottles without panic, changing diapers with laughter and half-curses. "This one's leaking again," he muttered, staring at Jaden's diaper like it was a bomb. Grace giggled, taking the baby from him. "You're getting better." Peter smiled. "Only because you're here." Their rhythm became effortless. One evening, after dinner and bath time, Peter lingered as Grace rocked Jake near the crib. The other two were already asleep. The nursery glowed in warm lamplight, a hush settling over the room like a prayer. "I used to fear silence," Peter said suddenly. "After Elena died, it meant something was missing. But now, it just means you're here." Grace looked up, surprised. Peter's voice was low. "I think I started healing the moment you walked into this house." She swallowed. "Peter, I'm in love with you, Grace." Her eyes welled before she could stop them. "I've tried to ignore it, try to keep things professional. But every time I see you with him, every time I hear you laugh, I know I'd be a fool to pretend this isn't real." Grace held Jake a little tighter, her voice a whisper. "And I love you, but I'm scared." He moved closer. "Of what?" "Of losing this," she said, eyes shining. "Of believing this is forever when it might not be." Peter reached out and gently took her free hand. "I don't make promises lightly, but I can promise this. Whatever we face, we'll face it together. No one's walking away." A quiet moment passed, and then she leaned in. Their lips met softly, like a prayer offered not in words but in presence. The baby slept soundly. The world slowed down, and for the first time in years, Peter felt like the house was whole again. Outside the nursery door, Lorraine's footsteps faded down the hall. She had seen enough, and what she carried in her hand would change everything. What love built after the miracle. The morning Lorraine was asked to leave, the house didn't react with drama or a noise. Just peace. Peter didn't raise his voice. He simply handed her a signed release, looked her in the eyes, and said, "This home is built on love now, and there's no room for anything less." She left without argument, but not without fury. Still, even her bitterness couldn't cling to the walls anymore. The shadows had lifted. In the weeks that followed, the mansion found a new rhythm, one filled with joy instead of grief. Grace, now fully welcomed into the heart of the home, became more than a caregiver. She was the boys' laughter when they played, their comfort when they fell, their safety when the world felt too big. And Peter, he stood beside her, no longer just a grieving husband or a frantic father, but a man being made whole, day by day, by love that didn't demand perfection. One golden evening, Peter found Grace in the garden. She sat on a bench, watching the triplets toddle across the grass, their giggles filling the warm air. He sat beside her, his expression full of quiet emotion. "I never thanked you," he said softly. Grace turned, smiling. "For what?" "For saving my sons." Her eyes shimmered. "And for saving me," he added. "You gave us back something I thought was gone forever." Grace looked down at her hands. "All I ever wanted was to be needed, to be chosen for once." Peter reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded paper. It was a drawing, childlike and messy, but it showed a woman holding 3 stick-figure babies, smiling under a crooked sun. One of the boys had drawn it during their morning coloring session. "They already see you as theirs," Peter said, voice tight with emotion. "And so do I." Grace blinked fast, breath catching. Peter continued, "I want you to be part of our lives. Not just in the nursery. Not just during the day. Always." Grace didn't answer right away. She looked toward the house that once echoed with screams and sobs, now glowing with warmth and light. She looked at the children who had chosen her without question. She looked at the man who saw her, fought for her, loved her, and she whispered, "I'm already home." That night, the nursery glowed softly, just like the night everything changed. Grace lay on the oversized bed, holding Jake on her chest, John curled beside her, Jaden tangled in her arm. Peter lay on the other side, his hand gently resting over hers. Outside, the ocean whispered against the Malibu cliffs. Inside, the house finally breathed with ease. No chaos, no grief, only peace, only love. And as the baby slept safe, warm, and still, Peter whispered into the quiet night, This is the real miracle.